here in the History Department to serve as rector of Moreau Seminary. And it's truly a privilege to serve as the chair of this panel entitled Baylor University, Being Christian in the New Millennium. And I thank you all for attending and hope there will be some good participation with our two speakers. As many of you know, Baylor University was founded in 1845, similar time to the university hosting this conference. It was founded by Judge R.E.B. Baylor and two Baptist ministers back when Texas was still a sovereign republic.
Still is.
I was going to offer a comment, but I thought one would emerge. Anyway, the school intended to produce clergy and laity for building up of both the Baptist churches in Texas and beyond, and of course the society around it. And it has done this impressively since then. Over the past decade or so, maybe decade and a half, Baylor has paid special attention to its mission and identity as it has sought to become an ever more distinguished Baptist university. It has been a wonderful example of a school committed to maintaining its religious identity while continuing its efforts to enhance its academic excellence. And we will hear today two perspectives on Baylor's continuing journey to fulfill its mission. So firstly, we will hear from Professor Don Schmeltekopf and then from Professor Ralph Wood. Don will speak first and take some questions, then Ralph will speak and take some questions. Let me firstly introduce Professor Don Schmeltekopf. He served as provost of Baylor University for 11 years before retiring from that position in May of 2003, and obviously he is one of the key players in Baylor's recent development.
Excuse me, Bill, it was actually 12.
12 years.
I'm afraid
I'm relying on David Solomon for factual information.
Because that's an important Christian number.
That is a more significant Christian number than 11.
That's right.
I don't think it's as significant as 7 or 3 or 1, but it's still pretty important. Don remains at the university as a professor of philosophy today. During his 12 years as provost, Baylor created 4 new academic divisions: the George W. Truett Theological Seminary, the School of Engineering and Computer Science, the School of Social Work, and the Honors College. It added PhD programs in a number of fields, and in addition, it was just an incredible expansion across a range of things: international programs, size of faculty, faculty research, and scholarly activity. A truly impressive enterprise that Don oversaw. Dr. Schmeltekopf earned a BA degree from Baylor in 1962, holds a Master of Divinity from Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary, and a PhD from Drew University. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Professor Don Schmeltekopf, who will speak on changes at Baylor. Don.
Thank you very much. I want to give an interpretive history of Baylor for the decade of the 90s and to the present. So you might say what I would like to do is to give a story of what I think is renewal at our university. Now, it's a story that, of course, isn't finished. So we'll see how it comes out down the road. But this is the story today. I want to begin with the charter change that took place at Baylor on September 21, 1990, and you'll see in a moment why that's critical. That was the day the governing board of Baylor, then called the Board of Trustees, under the leadership of former President Herbert Reynolds, decided to make an essential change in the university charter regarding the selection of its members. For over 100 years prior to September 21, all Baylor board members had been selected by an outside group called the Baptist General Convention of Texas. The revised charter mandated that henceforth only 25% of the board would be chosen by this group, and the remaining 75% by the board itself. The revised charter also specified that while all board members must be Baptists, up to 25% of the board could be selected from outside Texas, the country, thus positioning Baylor to create a board that was more national in character. By the way, our motto from the very beginning has been pro ecclesia, pro Texana. And that's, as Bill said, Texas was at that time an independent republic. So by Texana, we mean the nation. This action of the Baylor Board to change its basic governance structure, especially in regard to the university's historic relationship to the BGCT, evoked strong reactions within Texas and among Southern Baptists everywhere. Outside of Baptist circles, the story of Baylor's charter change drew national attention in both the secular and religious media and in higher education publications such as the Chronicle of Higher Education. Some of you may recall that the board had initiated the charter change against the background of the struggle then taking place within the Southern Baptist Convention for control of its affiliated institutions and agencies, a struggle popularly described as a battle between religious conservatives and moderates that began in 1979 with the election of a fundamentalist SBC president. Now, let me just say that Baylor was not a Southern Baptist institution. It was part of the Texas Association of Baptist Churches called the Baptist General Convention of Texas. However, the SBC was the larger context in which we operated as a Baptist institution. I just want to clarify that. The reactions to the charter change from individuals and bodies both inside and outside Baylor were cast along a wide political spectrum. There was, one, a lament from the right that Baylor would now inevitably slide, or continue its slide, into the iron grip of secularism, taking the same pathway of countless other religiously affiliated universities over the past century or so in the United States. Two, a celebration from the left that Baylor had now finally rid itself of these religious shackles that had long prevented it from becoming a truly prestigious modern university like SMU, Duke, Wake Forest, and so forth, and that it might now, in fact, become exactly the sort of university that the right feared. And three, a growing realization from the center that Baylor would now be free to pursue its own course as a serious Christian university, a university both intellectually enlightened and religiously faithful, a university that could provide the kind of leadership in the Protestant and Free Church tradition that Notre Dame represented within the Roman Catholic community. The Baylor Board and administration were by and large committed to this third view. And it was within that context that I became the chief academic officer in June 1991, after having served 1 year as vice provost. In my first address to the Baylor faculty on August 22, 1991, I asserted the need to have, quote, a fresh conversation about the meaning of a Christian university, unquote, and challenged all present that day to join with me and others across the nation in taking a new look at the nature of Christian higher education and the distinctive purposes of our institutions, particularly as these matters applied to Baylor. Our problem was at this point that we had no sustainable model to follow. What does it mean to be a Christian university within this context? The reigning view at Baylor was the atmospheric model. And that meant to offer an excellent education in a Christian environment. That is, the education part of Christian higher education is essentially no different from the education that takes place in any other sector of higher education, public or private, secular or sacred, except perhaps for Bible courses, and we have long required either 1 or 2 Bible courses of all of our students. Literature is literature, history is history, sociology is sociology, biology is biology, engineering is engineering, and so forth. One's education at the University of Texas, just down the road, would basically be no different than what one would get at Baylor, except at Baylor, the environment and culture, a quality of student life concerned primarily, would be more Christian. There is little or no conception in the atmospheric model that Christian understanding, as my colleague Stephen Evans has written, quote, relates to the whole of life and human learning, not simply theological and biblical education, unquote. Rather, in this older and accepted view, Christian higher education is defined largely by the context, the environment in which it takes place. The Baylor Purpose Statement of 1938-39 provides an eloquent summary of this view. Quote, no university can be great, whatever may be its assets, whatever may be its scholastic achievements, that does not develop within its own life a pure, radiant, institutional soul. The thing of superlative importance about any university is its atmosphere. At least 60% of all college culture is atmospheric. What is taught is not as important as the atmosphere in which it is taught. The atmosphere of Baylor University, like the atmosphere of the earth, is a mixture of life-giving components. It is calm with culture, warm with human sympathy, electric with inspiration, vibrant with intellectual health, and dynamic with the ideals of the Christian religion. The highest purpose of Baylor University is to develop men and women of Christian culture and character, unquote. This view, or some version of it, has been a repeated theme again and again by Baylor presidents for decades. For example, in 1985, then-Chancellor Abner McCall, formerly president of Baylor for 20 years, wrote these words in Baylor's alumni magazine, quote, the description Christian should imply that all who operate our educational institutions should strive to give the quality of excellence. Further, when we designate our institutions as Christian, we profess that their services are rendered in a Christian manner, with respect, concern, compassion, and love for those serving and those served, unquote. While there's clearly a noble tone in these words, and we could use some Christian culture and character right now at Baylor, as maybe some of you know, what this version of a Christian university represents is at once the pietistic heritage of Baptists and the poverty of our theology. But it has been the reigning view, and almost everybody has assumed this position, including board members, presidents, faculty members, alumni, and most students. In addition, there were no alternative models available among large Protestant universities for us to consider borrow. Next, how to proceed. Given the charter change on the one hand, and given the challenge of direction on the other, what should we do, at least with respect to the academic side of the house? It was clear to some, Mike Beatty being a principal one of the some. I don't know if Mike is here or not, but I do want to say that about Mike. It was clear to some that the atmospheric model would not sustain us in our desire to be a serious Christian university in the late 20th century, with its attendant secularization permeating the intellectual culture of our nation's universities. An important first step, begun in 1991, was the formation of faculty discussion groups to address the question, what does it mean to be a Baptist and Christian university? The groups were called together under the heading Faith and Learning Colloquia. Each year for 5 years, different groups of 10 faculty members met with the provost every 3 weeks for the entire academic year, discussing a range of questions and issues all with the aim of answering the main question before us. These discussion meetings were held over breakfast and included a brief period of worship. Here are some of the typical specific questions discussed in the colloquia over the 10 years. 1. What are the distinguishing characteristics of a Christian university that mark it as different from a secular university? 2. If one accepts that all truth is God's truth, and that for the Christian there is no strict sacred or secular divide, what are the implications for the curriculum and the way that the curriculum is taught? 3. As a species of Christian universities, is there anything distinctive about a Baptist university? And if there is, what is it? 4. Are theology and ethics legitimate parts of a university's entire mission? 5. Would a Christian university be as predisposed to develop as a research institution as it would a teaching institution? 6. What can be done to ensure that a solid Christian faculty will be here in 2020 AD? 7. Should Notre Dame, Brigham Young, and Boston College be defined as peer institutions? 8. Do academic freedom and Baylor's goals conflict? 9. Why are many of the faculty anxious about the faith and learning issue? And what could the administration do to calm this anxiety? That question came up like in year 4 and year 5. And 10, are there any departments that do a good job of avoiding putting religion and academia in two separate spheres? If so, what can we learn from these departments? Every year we had, 20 or 30 or 40 questions, and this is just a select group from those lists. By design, there was not initially a widespread awareness on campus of these meetings, though there was no attempt to keep them secret. In fact, 2 or 3 years passed before the existence of the discussion groups became known. At that point, many faculty members inquired how they could be involved. But at the same time, many others, as can be seen from 1 or 2 of these questions, began to be alarmed. A second important step was Baylor's active involvement, beginning also in 1991, in the national network of church-related colleges and universities led by Valparaiso University, called the Lilly Fellows Program in Humanities and the Arts. Baylor was one of the invited 25 charter members of this organization. And for the first time in its history, Baylor now had important connections in Christian higher education well beyond its circle of Baptist schools. Baylor people were now engaging in serious dialogue with academic folks from Valparaiso, Notre Dame, Calvin, Pepperdine, Boston College, Wheaton, St. Olaf, and others. As a result of these contacts, leading Christian scholars began to appear regularly on our campus. Scholars such as Mark Schwain, Nicholas Wolterstorff, George Marsden, Stephen Evans, Gene Elstein, David Solomon, James McClendon, Mark Knoll, William Abraham, Al Planiga, Eleanor Stump, and on and on. Now, a few of these persons had appeared on our campus before, but nothing like this previously. Some of our faculty knew these individuals, and a few had even studied with 1 or 2 of them. But on the whole, these conferences brought these individuals to Baylor during the decade of the 90s, offered new conversation partners for many of our faculty, and added immeasurably to the emerging debate taking place on our campus about the meaning of a Christian university. David Solomon spent a semester with us about 1994, was it, David? Something like that. Yeah. So that was the example of the sort of thing that was happening more and more. These new colleagues and friends from outside Baylor did not think and do their intellectual work within the framework of an atmospheric model. These new colleagues and friends thought in the framework of an implicit integration model. And this view, which shaped much of their scholarship as well as their understanding of Christian higher education, represented a huge challenge to the reigning atmospheric view. The importance of these connections for the changes that have taken place at Baylor cannot be overestimated. Consequences. The conversation taking place at Baylor regarding its Baptist and Christian identity soon began to have specific consequences for the life of the university. I want to discuss three of these: faculty hiring and tenure decisions, the approval of a new university mission statement in 1994, and the new emphasis on research and graduate education. A fourth consequence, at least in part, that I here will simply note was the selection of Robert Sloan as the new president of Baylor in 1995. There can be no doubt that the new emphasis on integrating faith and learning within the context of our charter change was a contributing factor to his being named president by the Board of Regents. I want to begin with the new mission statement. Now, at Baylor, sometimes we take our mission statement seriously and sometimes we don't. But in this case, with respect to the 1994 statement, we have taken it very seriously. The prior mission statement of Baylor, adopted in 1986 as part of our regional reaccreditation self-study, was imbued with atmospheric type language. Quote, and this is representative, I'm not being selective to tilt the argument here, but this is representative. Quote, its mission is to be an institution of higher learning where education can be gained under Christian influences and ideals, to develop in students spiritual sensitivity and a sense of Christian commitment to moral discrimination in action. This university is proud of its Christian heritage. The mission of Baylor University is pursued within the framework of a program which emphasizes the liberal arts component of a high-quality undergraduate education, but which also includes significant graduate and professional programs, unquote. Now compare that language to this of 1994. Quote, the mission of Baylor University is to educate men and women for worldwide leadership and service by integrating academic excellence and Christian commitment. Established to be a servant of the church and of society, Baylor seeks to fulfill its calling through excellence in teaching and research, in scholarship and publication, and in service to the community, both local and global. Baylor is founded on the belief that God's nature is made known through both revealed and discovered truth. Thus, the university derives its understanding of God, humanity, and nature from many sources: the person and work of Jesus Christ, the biblical record, and Christian history and tradition, as well as scholarly and artistic endeavors. Baylor affirms the value of intellectually informed faith and religiously informed education. Advancing the frontiers of knowledge while cultivating a Christian worldview, Baylor holds fast to its original commitment to build a university that is pro ecclesia, pro texana, unquote. I think you can see some clear differences in the tones of those respective statements. The 1994 mission statement, which had wide input from the university community, was approved by the board under the presidency of Herbert Reynolds in 1994. This mission has been the fundamental driving force behind all that Baylor has done since its adoption, including the 10-year vision issued by Robert Sloan in 2001. By contrast, the 1986 statement was of little or no value as a driving force to make Baylor a more intentionally Christian university. It was rarely used in a public way to justify what we were about. Second, faculty hiring and tenure. For the decade prior to the 1990s, the hiring and tenuring of Baylor faculty members gave minimal attention, except for those in the religion department, to religious commitment, in particular to congregational membership and involvement. Essentially, the practice was to inform prospective faculty candidates that Baylor was a Baptist and Christian university and that it sought academics who would be in sympathy with that identity. Candidates were asked to declare their denominational affiliation, but that was the extent of their required declaration. After hiring, the practice was more or less a don't ask, don't tell approach, an approach which assumed that the identity of Baylor would be self-sustaining, given the fact that the overwhelming majority of the faculty were church members in one denomination or another. Church affiliation and participation, however, did not come up in tenure evaluation, even though the board had stated as a policy in 1978 that all faculty members should be encouraged to be involved in a local congregation. From the discussions of the Faith and Learning Colloquia, as well as from my own observations of Christian higher education nationally and the overwhelming secularity then prevailing, it seemed clear that we needed to take the religious qualifications of faculty candidates far more seriously than we had in the previous decade or so, especially at the point of hiring. We simply could not take for granted any longer that Baylor would somehow continue to be able to recruit the appropriate faculty both intellectually and religiously. Therefore, when I became the Chief Academic Officer in 1991, I began the practice of an extended conversation with all faculty candidates about their religious commitments, how these commitments influenced their academic work, and how they saw themselves fitting within the Baylor culture. Obviously, one must be careful in discussing these matters at an institution like Baylor, in part because Baptists are non-creedal and thus fear even the appearance of litmus tests. But it doesn't follow that you can't have a serious conversation that can be very revealing to both parties, and that's what we did. Generally speaking, the strategy for the conversation was straightforward. The candidates were asked to talk about their faith and practice over time. I or a dean talked about Baylor's aspirations as a Christian university, and then we sought to establish if there was genuine common ground. And usually this part of the conversation, covering the interview would be 45 minutes roughly overall, would be about 1/3 of the allotted interview time. One of the challenges I faced as provost was to push this conversation down to the departmental level. With some departments, we have had success in this regard, in others not. Irrespective of such success or lack thereof, an all-important element was the willingness of the deans and the central administration to deny departmental recommendations on religious grounds. After all, the university is, in the final analysis, its faculty, not its students, as popular opinion might have it. And this has been the practice that we have followed over the years, and in 1996, these practices became codified in a mutual agreement between the administration and the faculty senate. As the religious qualifications for hiring were raised, at least in the sense of greater expectations on Baylor's side, it was not long before religious qualifications began to be taken more seriously in tenure decisions. Before I explain, may I add that qualifications for tenure were raised in the late 1990s across the board in teaching, research, and service. For example, peer review of teaching was instituted for all tenure-track faculty members, but even more important was greater expectations in the area of research and scholarship. In other words, the bar was being raised in every respect, and that included religious expectations. This meant, and continues to mean, that tenure candidates must submit as part of their tenure application written statements and other forms of evidence that, one, they are involved in a local congregation, either church or synagogue, and two, that they support the mission of Baylor as a Christian university. With respect to the support of Baylor's mission, it is understood by the candidates that the case needs to be made in a persuasive fashion. A couple of general comments will not suffice. These matters should be of no surprise to tenure candidates in light of the fact that our tenure policy explicitly calls for them to address such questions. Moreover, these issues are discussed in annual pre-tenure reviews as well. Faculty members can and occasionally are denied tenure because they are judged not to meet these qualifications. The third consequence of our renewal efforts was a new emphasis on research and graduate education. This new emphasis is being driven not primarily by an ambition to be a Tier 1 university, although that is a factor, but primarily by our desire at Baylor to be a preeminent Christian research university. Research and the expansion of graduate education follow from the spirit of our mission adopted in 1994, from the galvanizing effects of a decade or more of examination of Baylor's place in Christian higher education in America, and from the inspiration of our 10-year vision or plan called Baylor 2012. Our conviction at Baylor is that there is a great need in the higher education community for a Protestant evangelical intellectual voice, a Christian research university committed to the notion that the Christian faith and intellectual tradition contain essential insights about the human condition, human strivings, and the natural world, and that a Christian witness in these matters often offers an important, indeed even radical, alternative option to the standard secular options available. In order to make this contribution, we must not only recruit top faculty, but also ask them to be productive scholars, whose ideas will be both heard and respected in their respective academic communities and in the wider culture. Enhanced graduate education must be part of this equation because of the intellectual influence we wish to have, and because top faculty want to be in the company of talented graduate students who themselves will be able to make contributions to scholarship, and particularly Christian scholarship, in the years to come. In keeping with this aspiration, we have instituted 4 new PhD programs in the past 3 years: mathematics, philosophy, sociology, religion, and religion, politics, and society, and have several others under consideration. Of course, as those of you know who have strong doctoral programs at your institutions, such programs can be very important for the quality of undergraduate work and the recruitment of top undergraduate students. Top undergraduate students want to be on a campus that is intellectually stimulating, and first-rate faculty and graduate students are essential for such a learning community. Conclusion. I want to conclude with a word of concern about Baylor and a word of hope. The word of concern has to do with the divide that has developed on our campus between those who are opposed to some or all of the changes I've discussed and those who are enthusiastic about what is happening at Baylor, particularly the vision to become a serious Christian research university. To state the matter bluntly, Baylor is going through a major transition, both intellectually and culturally. This transition is not the product of recent controversies on our campus, but has been in the making for several years, even decades. The enormous media attention on Baylor this summer painfully brought the divide into the open, and in many cases has made the divide personal. One challenge now, while embracing the direction we have embarked upon, is to build, in good faith, a new consensus that will sustain us for years to come. The word of hope, and there are many others I could mention, has to do with the tremendous success we have had and continue to have in the recruitment of talented new faculty members, both senior and junior. Some thought that our explicit commitment to be a serious Christian university in the full sense of the word would hamper faculty recruitment. By and large, that has not been the case at all. In fact, just the opposite has proven true thus far. It is not always easy, especially in the sciences and some social sciences. But apparently there are a considerable number of scholars, again, both senior and junior, who are looking for the opportunity to be a part of a Christian intellectual community. One such faculty member who joined us this fall is Sarah Jane Murray, Assistant Professor of Medieval Literature and French, who received her PhD from Princeton in June, having won their most outstanding graduate student award. I close with these words she spoke in a public meeting on campus just 3 weeks ago. Quote, "By the 1st of January last year, I had been called to 6 interviews. My interview at Baylor was both pleasant and intellectually stimulating. In many ways, it set the standards by which I was to judge all of my other interviews. Everyone I spoke with here was eager to learn more about me and my work. It was what I, as Sarah Jane, had to offer in all my complexities that interested Baylor. You see, I was born in Northern Ireland. I was baptized Methodist, raised Episcopalian, and for the better part of my childhood, I was educated in private, that is, Catholic school in France. I've often attended and been welcomed by my husband's Baptist church in Columbus, Georgia. Put that together. I respect the preacher of that church so much that last summer my husband and I asked him to perform our marriage ceremony in Princeton's chapel. Whatever particular kind of person Baylor is supposedly trying to hire, I tried to imagine what that box might look like. It would surely be a very large box, and I suspect that it couldn't have any corners. I'm excited to be at Baylor, she goes on. What caught my eye was a vision without negating or ignoring our Christian commitment. Rest assured, the Baylor you love, the Baylor I'm growing to love and beginning to be a part of, is alive and well. I'm honored to have joined this great Christian university. And she signs off with very, very best wishes, Sarah Jane Murray, and I conclude with her words. Thank you very much.
So we'll open it up for questions for Don first, so perhaps 10 minutes or so. Yes.
I have just a very little question. When I read about your hiring policies, it seems that you said the people whom you want to hire should be engaged in a community, either church or synagogue, and at the same time, out of their heart, support the idea of a Christian
That's right.
How do you put an honest Jew into
Yeah, right.
a wholehearted Christian?
Yeah. Well, we actually do have a few. This is a kind of a paradox of Baylor's history. Baylor didn't intend to have a policy of hiring that would include Jews. However, we ended up about 50 years ago with a Jewish person who became the dean of our School of Music. Somehow or other, I don't know exactly what the details were. To my knowledge, we never had a Jewish person on our faculty before, but he was not only hired as a faculty member, but as dean of the School of Music, and served for about 30 years. Well, we had to accommodate our policy to take care of that one individual. Well, he very much affirmed Baylor's Christian mission, and now we have 3 or 4 Jewish faculty members, and they are very, very willing and supportive of our Christian mission, and are very comfortable within that context. So that's how it works, or that's how it has worked so far.
Yep. Can you comment, sir, on maybe the next 10 or 15 years, the issue of collaboration between Baylor, Notre Dame, maybe and other medium and small schools out there, whether it be in teaching or scholarly efforts?
Right.
Now repeat the question, Don.
The question has to do with the collaboration that Baylor might be engaged in the years ahead with Notre Dame, but also with smaller Christian colleges and universities in the country. Well, the collaboration with Notre Dame has been one of the great assets over the last 10 or 12 or so years. I can't begin to say how much of a difference it has been made. In a sense, Notre Dame became our model. We wanted to be to Protestants in the Baptist community what Notre Dame has been to the Roman Catholic community. And I know there are other very important Roman Catholic universities. So we recruit people from Notre Dame. In all sorts of departments and so forth, and there's a lot of traffic between the two institutions. But one of the things we want to do with regard to Christian colleges and universities is to serve them with faculty members. That's one of the main driving forces behind our PhD, our increased number of PhD programs, is we believe that small Christian colleges and universities they're just going to be in a terrible bind to know where to get faculty. Of course, they're already in that case. I know that firsthand because before I went to Baylor, I was at a small Baptist college in North Carolina, Mars Hill College. And it was, you know, at that time, I would call Baylor and ask, well, whom do you have in certain areas? Well, they didn't have this PhD program or that PhD program, and couldn't be of much help. So we, like so many others, were just stuck with whatever the state research universities and other elite private schools might offer. And it was increasingly difficult to find faculty members who cared about our missions and who would not, in fact, once they got there, actually undercut what we've been trying to do and what the institution was about for its entire history. So we think that this is a place, a way for Baylor to serve the larger Christian higher education community, and also to recruit and to get graduate students from those institutions to come to Baylor.
At the back?
Just Engelhardt from the Republic
Yes.
of Texas.
Yes, right.
As
Good to see you.
In the 1970s, one of the remarkable changes in Christian colleges is they ceased to require chapel services.
Yes.
That lost its central role in the nurturing of the life of the college and the university. How do you encourage your students to participate in Christian worship? How do you nurture what was, up into the 70s, understood integral to the education of Christian men and women?
Thank you for that question. Actually, there's been a recovery at Baylor of our chapel program in the last 2 or 3 years. We require, what is it, 2 years? 2 semesters. We require 2 semesters of chapel for all of our students. And they are expected to do that in the first year. Now, I say we have a recovery of chapel. That's due primarily to our new university chaplain, Todd Lake, who, while we don't have much in the way of liturgical worship, I'm afraid, nevertheless, we certainly have strengthened the spiritual and substantive religious dimensions of our chapel program. This year, we have instituted for the first time something called Friday Chapel. Ralph, do you know, or is anyone from Baylor involved in working with that program? Marty,
I'm not, but I know people who are. It's Chapel Fridays. It's a discussion groups with professors based on the chapel services during.
And there's been a very high number of faculty volunteers, something like 70 faculty members who have volunteered to participate in that program with the students. So the students go to chapel twice a week for 2 semesters, and on Fridays there is this additional discussion time. So I'm encouraged in that respect, and also, of course, with our seminary now on campus, we also have additional venues for worship within a more favorable liturgical setting.
Final question.
I was really interested in the way you were talking about the graduate department or graduate programs fitting into the mission. And as a graduate student at Notre Dame, I'm always interested how we're fitting into the university's mission and the university's life.
Right.
Because when you add graduate students, you have this third category.
That's right.
They're not quite undergraduate students, but they're not quite faculty. So I wondered, how does the graduate student life reflect, get involved with, promote the university's Christian mission with relation to being in that third category, that new category?
Well, in the first place, most of our strongest PhD programs are in the humanities. So there's a natural connection with our Christian and religious mission. So we have PhD programs that are identified in substance with the Christian tradition in some way or another. So that brings a certain kind of graduate student to your campus. But second, in the first year, we have an orientation program for our graduate students, which is designed to do 2 things. First, to talk about what it means to be a Christian university like Baylor, and what it might mean to work in one of those, and then what the contribution might be of a faculty member in both teaching and research in an institution like that. So this is now for all of our first-year doctoral students who attend this, who are part of an orientation seminar for the entire semester that is run by our graduate dean. And so far, the reports on that are very, very encouraging and very positive. But there are more things that we need to do in this area to integrate the graduate students into the full life of the institution. So I would say that that's something we're going to have to continue to work on.
Thank you so much.
One has to admire a provost who met with all job candidates and had a discussion with them. I think, I'm not sure whether you use these terms, but you're certainly likely not to have to spend much time in purgatory. You paid your dues. Dr. Ralph Wood is Professor of English at Baylor University. He received his BA and his MA degrees in English from East Texas State University, as well as his MA and PhD in Theology and Literature from the University of Chicago. His teaching and research commitments include Christian literary classics, the Oxford Inklings, as well as 20th century theology and literature. Now, before coming to Baylor, which he has done quite recently, he taught for 26 years at Wake Forest University, where he won awards for distinguished teaching. And I should mention that his book, The Comedy of Redemption, Christian Faith and Comic Vision in 4 American Novelists, which is published by the University of Notre Dame Press in 1988, is still available. I don't know whether it's downstairs or not, Ralph, but perhaps you could order it. But it gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Ralph Wood.
Well, I'm very grateful for the invitation from David Solomon and for the introduction by Father Mr. Campbell, and I'm glad to be here indeed. My speech is entitled Reaping the Enlightenment Whirlwind at Baylor. Don Schmeltekopf has been telling you what we're trying to do, and my job is to tell you why it's met such huge opposition. And to do that, I'm going to try to offer a theological analysis of what's happened at Baylor and therefore what might yet happen, I think, that has enormous promise. Most of you know that Søren Kierkegaard famously said, the problem with Christianity is not that it has been tried and found wanting, but that it's never been tried. Well, I can say I think something similar at Baylor. It's not that the idea of the university that we're proposing has been tried and found wanting, but that it hasn't been attempted yet. So it's about what we're attempting that I want to speak, and about why it has met with considerable antagonism and hostility. I might add as a footnote for your own perplexity, a warning given me by Stanley Hauerwas when he heard I was coming to Baylor, because at that time the mantra being used at Baylor was, we're about to become the Protestant Notre Dame. Stanley called me up and with a string of epithets that I can't repeat, said, whatever else you do, don't go down there to Waco and make Baylor the Protestant Notre Dame. I'll leave it to you to interpret what he meant by that. I want to argue that the problem that we have faced at Baylor in these recent months especially, but in recent years overall, is that our theology is immensely impoverished. We have a terrible famine of the imagination, I think, as well as of the theological mind, because we have overprivileged the Enlightenment. And after saying what I think that means for our overprivileging of the Enlightenment, namely trying to analyze the problem that we've fed too long at the Enlightenment table rather than eating much richer fare that is available for us. I want to then argue as well what might be the answer to that thin gruel we've been imbibing and indulging, and then offer finally a very brief comment about what I see to be the larger consequence of the experiment that's occurring at Baylor by way of what I think our former provost rightly calls a renewal movement. And I will say in advance where I'm going, that is, I think we are trying something at Baylor that might be called a postmodern university. It's not modern, not pre-modern, but postmodern. and that as such, if it's going to succeed, it will succeed only by the grace of God. It will be a more sacramental kind of experiment in its understanding of the Christian faith and of its habits and practices that as a university we must both teach and exemplify, which is to say, of course, it will be more Catholic, at least in the lower case. So first of all, the one side of the Enlightenment that has given us so much grief, and that is, of course, the fact that since 1979, Baptists in the South and what's called the Southern Baptist Convention have divided into warring camps in which liberals have decided to rename themselves moderates, and in which fundamentalists have decided to rename themselves conservatives. Now, all four of those terms are non-theological. All four of those terms are borrowed essentially from the Enlightenment. And it's because what's happening at Baylor doesn't fit within any of those categories that people are having trouble understanding what's happening, and when they can't understand, they fight. So I want to argue that the two problems that are our legacy from the Enlightenment on both the left and the right are, as Walker Percy said long ago, mirror images of each other without knowing it. Or as the eloquent late governor of Alabama, George Wallace, put it, there ain't a dime's worth of difference between them. First then, fundamentalism. And my new colleague, Tom Hibbs, tells me he's trying to learn the complex metaphysics of Baptist life, so I'm here to try to instruct him today a bit about that. Fundamentalism then, first of all. It'd be clear that there are two kinds of fundamentalism. There's, first of all, the old-fashioned Southern variety, to which Flannery O'Connor, the great Catholic writer, the greatest Catholic writer our country has produced, was so deeply in sympathy with, and who largely draws upon for her work, her marvelous fiction. That kind of fundamentalism was almost entirely rural. It was a fundamentalism that sought no kind of political prominence. It was always on the edges of society, not at the center of society. It had no kind of reactionary quality to it. It wasn't opposing anybody or anything. It was centered around a literally interpreted Bible and a revivalistic kind of faith as the sine qua non of the Christian life. I myself, for example, grew up believing literally in the Bible stories, in the account of creation in Genesis, the historic flood that drowned the whole world, the Joshua stopping the sun at midpoint. Not because somebody told me I'd better believe those things or I was going to hell, or that if I didn't believe them, evolutionists were going to creep in and kill us, but because those stories were my ways of getting saved. And I got saved many times, as a matter of fact. So as George Morrison says, to describe the pre-1950s South as Christian fundamentalist is a redundancy. You didn't need the latter term. It was fundamentalist simply by what it was. However, there arose in the 1920s a new kind of fundamentalism. Northern, urban, largely centered around Chicago and Minneapolis, that was a conscious repudiation of modernity, of modernism as they so scornfully called it. The motto was, anyone who can preach above a whisper on Monday morning, who can speak above a whisper on Monday morning is a modernist. Hadn't shouted it loud enough on Sunday. Its aim was to establish a bulwark against the closed deistic cosmos that denies miracles and the historicity of most of the biblical narratives. And therefore it determined to establish the new scientific authenticity of the Scriptures. Their total, this is the language is central, their total plenary, verbal, historical inerrancy and infallibility in all matters, not just of faith and practice, but of course of science and history as well. And of course this is what we call from Genesis to the maps kind of fundamentalism. It is invested in a young universe, a literal Adam and Eve, as I said, a world-drowning flood, even a scientifically verifiable resurrection. God said it, I believe it, that finishes it. Now, it was this second kind of fundamentalism that triumphed in 1979, not the former kind, not the old-fashioned kind that Flannery O'Connor is drawn to. Stanley Hauerwas gives a succinct definition of the difference between the two. He says, you know that the old fundamentalism has ended when Texas Baptist preachers become indistinguishable from Texas Baptist politicians. And of course, he's absolutely right about that. This was a political movement. Ronald Reagan drew on it very powerfully for his 2 terms in office. It had about it a decided anti-Catholicism that simply cannot be denied. Al Mohler, the leader of this movement, who is now the president of the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in Louisville, held a press conference 2 or 3 summers ago to declare that the Catholic faith is a false church having a false teaching with a false leader. And that was not a Rush Limbaugh off-the-cuff comment. That was a statement made at a call press conference. So you follow. This is the new kind of fundamentalism that has triumphed in the Southern Baptist Convention since 1979. Michael Novak once said that the Christian right was the curse that God wickedly sent on the political left to kill it. I would modify Novak as follows. Fundamentalism was the curse that God sent on Southern Baptist liberals to kill them. And now he has largely succeeded, except that God, in his great irony, is using their capture of the gigantic Baptist convention bureaucracy as the means of killing them. And he is very successful. Now you want to ask, what on earth does any of this have to do with Baylor? Surely you don't have any fundamentalists at Baylor. If we do, I haven't spotted them. But the problem is this, of course, that in the 1980s, many of the Baylor faculty were attacked by these fundamentalist knotheads. And many Baptist professors at Baylor were under extreme fire from these folks. Their jobs were threatened. And of course, in our seminaries, their jobs were lost. They were fired or they had resigned under pressure. And as a result of that, many of our older faculty at Baylor are vehement anti-fundamentalists. They kind of adopt the old Marxist motto, no enemies to the left, only enemies to the right, and these enemies, of course, are called fundamentalists. They are the ones, of course, who had hoped that Baylor would simply become, as our provost provost told us, another SMU, another Wake Forest, kind of nominally Christian, and not seriously so. And so, because of this tremendous impoverishment of our vocabulary, of our theological imagination, the only epithet they know to throw at the new Baylor is that it's fundamentalist. It's not like them. I tell them that an anti-fundamentalist is still a fundamentalist, because it means you've let the enemy define all the categories by which you operate. Let me just demonstrate briefly how this charge that Baylor is somehow a new fundamentalist insurgency is palpably, manifestly, ludicrously untrue. For example, Baylor has greater religious diversity today than it's ever had in its past. In the 5 years I've been at Baylor, we've hired Pentecostals, members of the Churches of Christ, Methodists, Presbyterians, Lutherans, Catholics, Orthodox. In fact, some of my young Catholic friends at Baylor make the following remarkable testimony to me. They say we feel freer as young Catholic scholars to make our Catholic witness at Baylor than we do at some of our own Catholic institutions. Fundamentalists don't hire Catholics to their faculty. Secondly, we have a new $100 million science building going up, 500,000 square feet. It's being compared with the science edifices at Stanford and Cornell, and it's not being built for creationism. Fundamentalists do not build these great monuments to science as Baylor is doing. We have a new Great Text program at Baylor, which will eventually include all 11,000 of our undergraduate students who will be reading the great books in a theologically determined way. Again, fundamentalists don't do that. And not least of all, Baylor has, as of this past September, appointed its first Roman Catholic dean, who's in this room today, Dr. Thomas Hibbs, an alumnus of Notre Dame, who was the founding dean of our honors college. again, to my knowledge, the first and only Baptist university to have ever had a Roman Catholic dean. So the charge of fundamentalism is palpably, ludicrously wrong. It's because, again, we are reaping the Enlightenment world. We have no other categories in which to put things than these pathetically impoverished categories. Over against them then stand the so-called moderate or liberal folks. What I want to show is that they embody the very same paradigm from the Enlightenment, except just flipped around oppositely. And I want to describe that phenomenon, Baptist liberalism. Some people think that's an oxymoron, but believe me, it's not, under the following four categories: tolerance, individualism, moralism, and finally, bifurcationism. Tolerance is the watchword of course, that's a quintessentially Enlightenment word. That's John Locke's word above all. It's understood as a willingness not to show hospitality to others, to engage others seriously, but rather to be open to all opinions being more or less equal. The ideals of that notion of tolerance, of course, are diversity, inclusivity, and thereby a virtual disregard for essential theological convictions in the name of autonomy, independence. Again, all Enlightenment words. A concrete example, one of David Solomon's teachers has recently said, Baylor former faculty member, that one reason he delights in being a Baptist is that he doesn't believe in miracles. He doesn't believe in the virgin birth. He doesn't believe in the Trinity. And being a Baptist lets him have the freedom so to do. His name for me, therefore, is that I'm a creedalist, to which I reply, only were that it was so. Because creeds, you see, are seen as narrow, as exclusive, as confining, constricting, and therefore we've got to be tolerant in all of these regards. And therefore these folks have adopted the name moderate, which strikes me as the strangest name any Christian would ever want to assign to himself, since as far as I can see, those are the folks in the Church of Laodicea in the New Testament. Perfectly moderate, so moderate that, as the King James says, God promises to vomit them out of his mouth. My pastor in North Carolina was elected moderator of the state moderates. I said, what does that mean, making the moderates more moderate? When the tepid become more tepid, they become cold, I would assume. Aquinas says near the end of the Summa Theologica that while excess is almost always the source of evil, it is never the source of evil in the three theological virtues. You cannot love God excessively. You cannot hope in God excessively. You cannot have excessive faith in God. And that therefore the love and the hope and the faith in and of God are by definition immoderate. And if they're not immoderate, they're in a deep sense untrue. My own hero in these matters is Flannery O'Connor, who said that by definition Christians are eccentric. I take great comfort in that. That we have another center than the world center. And therefore she modified the saying of our Lord to read, as some of you know, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you odd. Chesterton, another one of my Catholic heroes, puts it well. He says the purpose of an open mind is like that of an open mouth, to shut it on something solid. Or, as he said, of tolerance, tolerance is a virtue to those who believe nothing. I think even the church's understanding of temperance is not to be understood as some sort of mild middle between the extremes, but as the word implies, a real tempering, a real refining of one particular virtue by exclusion of certain other kinds of practices, like fine steel being tempered. So tolerance has done us an awful lot of damage at Baylor, and we are reaping that whirlwind. It has as a part of it, of course, an explicit anti-Catholicism. For the folks who worship at the throne of tolerance, Catholicism means medievalism, superstition, and above all, authoritarianism. Secondly, after tolerance is individualism, the enthroning of the sovereign, all-determining self as having a direct and unmediated relation to God. And here I'm really trying to help Tom Hibbs out because he doesn't know what these phrases mean. The first is soul competency, and the second is the priesthood of the believer. Soul competency was originally a political doctrine developed out of the wars in England. Queen Elizabeth famously said, even the state cannot open a window onto the souls of men. So it was a way of trying to guard against the notion that the state can impose religious doctrine. But that has been now enshrined into a Baptist heresy, I think, Gnostic at its core, that each individual soul has complete capacity to know God without any kind of intervening intermediary authorities, institutions, doctrines, etc. For example, one of our regents has recently declared that no Baptist can tell any other Baptist what to believe about the Bible, for we each interpret it for ourselves. And by the way, that is such a sacred doctrine that only Baptists can teach it in our Department of Religion. And so we have, to our great distress, if I may say so, a Baptist-only rule in our Department of Religion, and that extends to the campus where only Baptist religious groups can meet authoritatively on the campus. All others are excluded. Now, I try to get you to understand once more, those are impositions of the Baptist left. That's not the imposition of any sort of fundamentalism from the right. Those are rules instituted by the Baptist left. A further illustration of that Baptist left is that when I heard Mr. Bottom this morning refer to the great moment in Houston when John Kennedy addressed the collection of Baptist ministers there, he failed to point out that the speech given by John Kennedy in Houston in 1960 was written by a liberal Texas Baptist named Bill Moyers, where, as you know, Kennedy promised that he would not let his allegiance to the Pope or the authority of the church in any way interfere with his discharging of his duties as the President of the United States. No sense of tension there whatsoever, much less the fact that Kennedy should have, first of all, been a Christian and, secondly, an American. Counterpoint, then, to these two notions. Well, secondly, the priesthood of the believer. That is a perversion of Martin Luther's thoroughly orthodox claim, where he was trying to move the monastery into the world, that every Christian, having in Jesus Christ our one true high priest, are meant to be priests unto each other. It was Luther's way of trying to reinstantiate the doctrine of the communion of saints. Not each person his own solitary priest, but each Christian priest to each other. So we've gotten rid of that entirely by this heretical doctrine of the priesthood of the believer. I was teaching Dorothy Day just this past week and reminded of what a good Baptist she is when she said the goal of every Christian is to become a saint. That's the doctrine of the priesthood of believers. Thirdly, moralism. The notion that the Christian life consists entirely in the doing of benevolent acts, what you Catholics call social justice. The motto among liberal Baptists in this regard is deeds, not creeds. That, of course, is a direct adoption of an Enlightenment motto, creeds divide, ethics unite. That's probably exactly the reverse of the case, but that's the motto. Creeds divide, ethics unite. And of course, the ethical point at which most of us Baptist liberals, and all of us in this room who are Baptists, or what I call recovering liberals, have as our chief example racism. Racism was the obvious evil pervading the entirety of Southern Baptist life. Indeed, the great tragedy of the South, as Walker Percy says, is that we Christians who are white violated our fellow black Christians, and no one thought it strange. No one thought it odd. That, of course, is indeed the horror of our history. And so, most of us, seeing that there was something truly evil about racism, reacted, I think quite rightly, of course, against it. But I remember something I learned from David Solomon several years ago when he said, it is a dangerous thing, a perilous thing, to cut your ethical teeth on the easiest moral issue of the 20th century. You're in great peril if that is your prime example of what it means to have made a Christian breakthrough. Because you see, then you come to assume that all moral questions are as obvious as that one, as simple as a matter of rights on the one hand, or justice understood as equality on the other. Because what happens then when you cut your teeth on an issue like that is then that you become moral very quickly without needing God. God gets edged out of the picture of the moral life. Arthur Schlesinger famously said that he had no disagreements with Reinhold Niebuhr whatsoever, but just wondered why Niebuhr had to talk about God. And at its worst, of course, this kind of ethics become not just ethics without God, but demonic, anti-human, anti-humanistic. Flannery O'Connor again famously said, tenderness cut off from the source of tenderness leads to the gas chambers. Finally, then, bifurcationism. Just a large word for what we also call the two spheres understanding of faith and learning. Namely, the division of the public and the personal, the educational and the religious into separate, almost hermetically sealed spheres, so that religious questions, for example, especially in the hiring process, should be left to the privacy of the faculty member. That's an invasion of his or her privacy to ask that question. It's an intrusion of religion into the classroom, turning it into indoctrination, according to this argument, if we don't keep these spheres separate and completely sealed off. 3 examples of that. First is from the previous president, who has recently declared, faculty at Baylor are not here to engage in religiosity. That's a code word, of course, meaning any outwardly displayed faith beyond the walls of the church. They're here to teach algebra, political science, the best way they know how, which is, to me, the Christian way. Now, no one will want to deny the point that teaching the best we know how is the sine qua non of Christian life, but surely there's something vacuous about calling that Christian. It's a vacuity that leads then faculties at many so-called Christian schools simply to look for the quote-unquote best faculty that can be found, with best not ever being defined. And that void left by that absence of definition is quickly filled, of course, by non-Christian notions of excellence. And usually those non-Christian notions wind up being utilitarian. This leads then to it carries over into scholarship in many ways. Just one example of how the two spheres view works out in scholarship. The historical method, critical method, almost completely triumphs in biblical studies, where you're simply trying to track down the authenticity historically of this or that kind of biblical story or event, or else you get these super elaborated biblical commentaries where my colleagues in Scripture tell me that the average biblical commentary now on a single book, no matter how short for the New Testament, runs to 3 fat volumes, the average commentary, which means, of course, they're totally useless to the church, useless to anybody but fellow scholars. But worst of all, the resulting idea of education from this bifurcation is that the notion of the marketplace of ideas triumphs. As we heard this morning, the marketplace of ideas winds up being usually chaotic at best, and at worst, of course, an exercise in the will to power. Those who have the most votes and the most money wind up winning. But it goes like this. This is the argument. We are supposed to be in the classroom objectively transferring and disseminating information to our students about the various disciplines of which we're alleged masters. The students, in turn, are allegedly there individually to collect and assimilate that information, and then to make up their own minds about how it might, if at all, have any possible bearing on their lives. This, of course, leads to the total fragmentation of learning, and what is far worse, it leads to the manufacture of better consumers as our only goal for education. 3 correctives to these 3 heresies of bifurcationism, and then I'll close. First of all, our aim at Baylor is to try to integrate faith and learning. by developing a shared discourse of common goods and common goals, as I've said before, especially through the theologically determined reading of great texts. Secondly, to promote scholarship that serves the church, whether directly or indirectly, rather than the academy or the global economy or the nation state above all else. For example, many of us at Baylor believe we have a need for a Baptist catechism, and the production of that would be an enormous service to the church, simply to equip lay people with the ability to inculcate the faith in their own children and at their own churches. We need, I think, a real renewal of the Christian imagination in matters artistic. We need to have a more coherent account of the juncture of the natural and the supernatural. And many of us at Baylor, by the way, don't think intelligent design is the way to do that. In other words, the church's house is in terrible disorder, and surely one very important thing a Christian university should be about is to get that house in better order in order to make its proper witness to the world. Thirdly, and most importantly, a university like Baylor, seeking to be Christian, wants to overcome the idea of education as the transfer of information, but rather, as Aristotle argued, as training in virtue. And therefore, education not as this individualistic enterprise, but as a communal undertaking of moral and religious formation of character, by learning both to live and to think with the richly varied and contested Christian tradition. The result then, I hope, I think, as I said before, by the grace of God, if we succeed, will be that we may not for long fend off what Scott Moore, my friend, calls our inevitable eventual failure, because the modern university is by nature a disenchanting university enterprise. But if we succeed, even temporarily, it will be by dint, I think, of an ecumenically Christian effort, where Baptists, Pentecostals, Methodists, Lutherans, Catholics, Orthodox will try to create a postmodern university built upon what the Baptist theologian James William McClendon called a tournament of narratives. And those tournament of narratives are not the same thing as the marketplace of ideas. Rather, our task is to articulate the Christian story as it both confronts and confirms other accounts of the human good, to discern how this complex and contested Christian tradition impinges on all scientific and humanistic questions. And as Alistair McIntyre reminds us, that since the Christian tradition is so contested, we might also even teach other non-Christian traditions how to carry on this tournament of narratives. And thus our aim is to seize the postmodern moment and to remind ourselves that as Christians, this tournament can never involve any sort of coercion, but always and only persuasion. And that our final aim in this tournament of narratives is not conquest, so much as conversion, and our own conversion first and chief of all. For as Christians, we believe that our aim in life is not to win, but rather to find the only true and common ground that we all have, which is at Golgotha. For there lies the one victory in which no human beings are defeated, but all men and women are made alive. Thank you.
A little bit over our time, but I think we can go for about another 10 minutes. So starting there with the question.
Just speak loudly because I'm not hearing impaired, I'm deaf.
I'm just a little bit curious as to why you're identifying this renewal at Baylor as a transformation into a postmodern university. It sounds more like, to me at any rate, you're adding meat and potatoes to a really thin Enlightenment gruel where you can, have a canon of great books and $100 million monuments to science and the space for Chapel Fridays all kind of coexisting together, right? It doesn't seem I guess I'm a little bit curious as to why you're.
Why is a list of why is the canon of great text in the ninth rule? I don't quite follow that.
Well, it just seems that I wasn't quite understanding why, the Enlightenment was, being bashed in terms of how you're saying, we have to leave that behind. Kind of thing. It just seemed like the kind of
challenge. I said we have to stop feeding on that fare alone.
Right.
To find ways to not over-privilege as we can.
Okay.
Yes, back here in the front there.
I'm wondering, I attended Liberty University, Gary Falwell, sort of fundamentalist strain. All the teachers who teach their half the science of six-day creation. I defected at that time to the dominant. For the reason of fundamentalism being me at points and being overly dogmatic, yet I wanted to stay historically Christian. Is Baylor trying to be not overly dogmatic or ecumenical, yet its aim is always to give some consideration of tradition?
Well, I hope we'd be tradition-centered, not giving some consideration to tradition, but being absolutely tradition-centered, and seeing ourselves, therefore, as the legatees of magnificent 2,000-year-old, as I said, rich, complex, very contested tradition. And if by dogmatism that means cramming things down people's throats, no. We, for example, have no requirement later that Christians that students be Christian. They sign no kind of oath or creed about their faith. But if by dogma we mean the central doctrines of the Christian faith, which is what I mean by teaching, yes, being in the very good sense dogmatic. In that sense.
So, I guess maybe you hinted on it with the idea of Baptist catechism, but my question is, where does the Baptist magisterium come from? And, right. So how do you become a unique in the word Baptist, not just a Christian university, but a Baptist Christian university?
Well, his question is, what is the relation between the word Christian and Baptist, I think, in our self-definition? It's a really crucial question. When I came to my interview in 1998, I asked President Sloan whether I would be, if I were known the fact that any university that defined itself as a Baptist university, full stop. Because I said to him, if that's the case, I have no interest in coming. That is a constricting, narrowing, confining definition. If, however, Baylor is a Christian university, where the word Christian always trumps the word Baptist, but a Christian university in the Baptist tradition, then I'm very much interested in coming. And he assured me, and nothing has proved contradictory to that, this latter definition. We're first and chiefly a Christian university. And that gives us the ecumenical kind of freedom to hire wherever he is, Tom is.
Up here, Ralph.
Yeah, right here, sir.
I'm very much interested in your Great Texts program.
His director is here. Scott Moore? Right here.
Okay, well, my question is, they've dropped out of so many colleges and universities.
Tell us about
it. Including Notre Dame, that don't require this. And one of the big problems seems to be getting faculty who are so highly specialized. They don't want to teach this because it's out of their field. So then that's often given to adjuncts or TAs, and then that becomes a problem. So how do you plan to handle that? And then you mentioned a theologically informed reading. How would the reading and teaching of these texts differ in a Christian university than they would at any other university?
Well, my friend Scott Moore plays very wicked tricks on me, so I'm going to do one on him. Scott, please answer her question. Stand up so you can be heard, please.
Well, the long and the short of it is it's a very difficult task. But we, just very briefly, we have been able to find particularly young scholars who have specializations, who are eager to teach in interdisciplinary and cross-disciplinary ways. We hired a product from Notre Dame via Boston College, Robert Miner. Rob is here right now. Rob, we have some people that we are hiring in the Great Text program. Their tenure will be in the Honors College, and in almost every case we're able to establish an affiliated relationship with a traditional academic department in the College of Arts and Sciences. We also have a number of positions that are hired in those traditional departments but have a contractual obligation to teach one Great Text course per semester. but their evaluation and tenure will be in that department. So,
For example, the Sarah Jane Murray that Professor Schmeltekopf referred to will be tenured in French.
she's with us.
I'm sorry, but she has great confidence in Dante.
One
One last question.
I very much enjoyed the presentation. I want to bring up the last point you made and tie it to Baylor's motto, because I think it might be very exciting. You were pointing out how it's misled by the private-public distinction, which tries to closet Christianity. I take it what you're really also trying to do is to nurture an unembarrassed Christian discourse in the public forum. Because if you're for the church and for Texas, you have to be in the word of Christian discourse in the public forum.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I think all of us here must hope and pray for the success of the Baylor venture. Please thank these two speakers for helping us understand. Thanks very much, folks.
You know, if we were doing these papers